Awesome. Hi, Rohit. How are you?
Hi, Devanshi. Hi. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Am I also?
Okay. Yes, you are.
Okay. Awesome. So I think maybe we'll take a minute and then we can just start off.
Sure.
Okay, cool. How's your Friday?
Another week just rushed by.
I know, same. I
Yeah.
feel like we end up saying the same thing at the end and beginning of
Yeah.
every week, but yeah. Do
And
you all get
I think,
Sorry, go
sorry?
ahead.
No, I was saying that it's just like a good note to end this with, having this chat, because I think just talking about well-being is my favorite thing. So,
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited. We had some great questions come in, and I think it's going to be
yeah.
a good conversation. Cool. So I think it's 5, and I think we should just get going. So
Sure.
to everyone who's already here, thank you for joining in. I know that we could all probably use a little bit less screen time, especially on a Friday. So it means a lot that you guys are taking the time to come hang out. By way of quick introductions, my name is Devanshi. I'm one of the co-founders of IDR. And with me is Rohit, who is the CEO of Apni Shala Foundation. That's an organization that, amongst other things, works with children, families, and educators to help build some of their social emotional competencies. So today we're going to be chatting about what all of us as nonprofits can do to invest in our team well-being. Obviously, since this is an IDR conversation, we will be sharing some tips and some best practices that organizations can use that are low cost and will also help be more intentional about being effective in some of this. So I also want to acknowledge, I know you guys sent in questions ahead of time. We've shared them with Rohit. We will be getting to them. We just want to do a quick little bit of introduction and context setting first. So Rohit, to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about like the importance of investing in team well-being and some of the challenges that nonprofits typically face in doing so?
Devanshi, I think we have come to believe that it is a non-negotiable, right?
Yeah.
Especially in development space, when we have to understand that the concept of work has shifted or has become more nuanced. When we talk about work in the concept of industrial revolution, it meant something else. Versus today, when we talk about work, like knowledge industry requires a different kind of existence from human beings, right? And especially in development sector, which requires all of us, people who are in the social impact work, to be on top of our game, whether it is cognitively, socially, emotionally, and many times even physically, right? For folks who are doing COVID relief work, they are out there doing stuff physically. So when we look at all of those things, there's a direct correlation of well-being to productivity and to what we say that what we are able to achieve or not in terms of social impact, right? And hence at Apni Shala, it became a really chicken and egg situation that do we become big enough to focus on this, or do we focus on this to become big enough? And I think we took a call that it is a very important ingredient on becoming big or not, but at least doing our work well.
Mm. Absolutely. So that brings me to my next thing. How do you approach this? I know that you've mentioned to me that it is part of your values, for example, in your organization.
Right.
But what is some of the thinking behind how you approach your team well-being, about how you strategize around it? What does that look like?
Right. So I think it is also an evolutionary journey, and I'm guessing that will be true for any organization. But when we are in social impact work, the first question we are asking is that what is this impact about? And Apni Shala, luckily we work in social emotional well-being for the world, right? So then when we ask that question, that when we are thinking about social emotional competency for young people, for children, for their caregivers, the next question is that how do we understand our own well-being? Because it looks like a fraud if we don't understand our own well-being and then we are going in coaching schools that this is how you should do your well-being.
Yeah.
So the first starting point for us was that, like, let's not be the fraud. Let's first do what we are preaching other folks to do. And I think, and that, I mean, that's more on the lighter note, but I think also that's this tension of this competency has to be practiced on day-to-day. It has to be lived reality of our team, so that when we are doing this work, it makes sense to schools, it makes sense to leaders that we are talking to, and also we realize that when we were not focusing on this, for example, I'll give you a very simple example. Typically, a facilitator, when they go into the classroom, we are saying that they will invest 12 hours of facilitation time. What we realized was that those 12 hours require X amount of planning. All of those sessions also kind of bring in some kind of triggers, some kind of emotions for the facilitator when they are working with the young, children and people, right? So how do we ensure that there's a time to reflect on those experiences? So slowly it got built. Earlier it was like, 12 hours of session, 12 hours of planning, or maybe even less because you have the competency. But then it was more incremental in nature, because when teams started coming back and saying that, only 5 minutes of break that we get transitioning from one class to the next class doesn't really help, because a child has just talked about physical abuse at home, and we need to figure out how to kind of process that in our own bodies, right? And it is true. So I'm assuming that when we go and do this work with communities, when we do this work with each other, right, there's so much of emotional spaces that are being created and intervened that needs to be responded to. And unfortunately, in Indian education system or Indian social systems, those systems did not exist, depending on who is designing those systems. But now it is becoming more imperative, because the more urbanized our work is becoming, and it's not good or bad, it is what it is. Hence, we have to very intentionally have to think about it. And I think that's where, when we started doing this work, we did a lot of workshopping it with the team, that what does rest true to you at this point of time. So 4 years back, the team that we had, when they come today, there's something which is core to Apni Shala that they will experience, and then something which will have changed drastically. And I think that goes back to keep asking the team that what do you need to do the work well, and that is always the adage. What do you need so that we can do this work better?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good segue into some of what we're talking about today, which is in the context of COVID, in the context of people working from home. We see nonprofits, we've had a lot of nonprofits write in and say, I need to look after my team, but what do I do? And I think what you said and you've mentioned this before, people know what they need, right? So ask them, and to make sure that you create a space where they are able to share some of that, and so that you can then build accordingly and figure out as an organization what's possible. So I think that's a really nice segue into some of the questions that we had, and I think let's start with this one, which is what can an organization do to create a space where people feel comfortable talking about their mental health, where they feel comfortable asking for what they need for their well-being, given the fact that people often worry that it might affect their performance negatively, or it might change their relationship with their managers, or with how the company views them.
I feel that the first starting point for any organization would be that it is time that we start learning about what is mental health and what is mental health spectrum. If we don't know that yet, it's okay. I mean, because this is new conversation for many of us. No blame, no shame, no guilt. Start from where we are. Especially leadership teams should start either going online. There's plethora of resources online. Read up what is mental health and what is organizational mental health. Two, I think, unless the stigma in leadership's mind is not taken away, is not worked upon, it becomes difficult to kind of seep it into the organization. So for any teams, we first, for example, even when we work with schools, we first talk about what does leadership think. Board members, do they have alignment with well-being of the organization? How are they looking at well-being? Is well-being understood as an input to the productivity or input to the outcome? Because that is something which many a times we see that it is this or that, right? Which is not true anymore. When we also look at the science behind emotions, right? The science of emotional intelligence, or science around emotional well-being, actually tells us that the quality of our work accentuates many folds if we are able to invest that in a strategic manner. I'm going to speak from a school example, for instance. There's a research done by KSL that says that if a school has a well-structured social-emotional development in its program in the school, the academic outcome increases almost by 11 percentile. There's a research done by Google on its employees. They asked what are the top 10 skills required for any employee to be successful in Google. The top 7 skills were social-emotional skills, right? So we need to start looking at well-being and social-emotional development very differently. It is actually not, it doesn't divert your resources or attention from the actual outcomes. It actually contributes positively towards that. So when we study this, that's when it kind of creates a scope for us to integrate it in ways that it really makes sense for the organization.
So could you, sorry, to press a little bit, could you give us some examples of how organizations can integrate it? What does that look like in practice?
Right. So it might look like, for example, you create workshops for leadership teams. Just gather a sense that where they are. Maybe there are many self-assessment tools available on KSL website, right? Maybe inviting the leaders to take those tools for themselves. Once we have a sense of where the organization is, then maybe if you want to do an organization-wide assessment, do that. That might be a useful place to start. And then also setting up a benchmark for yourself, because it doesn't have to happen that everything has to happen together. At this point, for example, speaking of COVID, right, it is very clear that teams are stressed. Now, in that response, what can happen? And we can do very quick surveys on Google Forms. I just create a Google Form, send it out, and just collect some data, because data is a good starting point, because it also makes you know that where are you starting from. So collect right kind of data, and then find right kind of organizations or even resources online that will make sense to you. For example, if my starting point is that I realize I am doing an analysis and I'm realizing that in my organization, there are people who are actually experiencing anxiety, right? And they may not have resources to go to a therapist. So I might have to actually create some system for them to access that. But whereas I find that none of my teams are on the extreme side of the spectrum, but there's a general distress in many people, right? So I might want to do some kind of, preventive and promotive work, right? Am I responding to your question?
I think so, yeah. I'm going to add to it, and then you jump in also. So I was thinking, what the question made me think of was also in terms of, like, say, for example, from policy, like adding a line to the policy that says mental health days are part of this, like you can take as many as you want, tells anybody who's part of the organization that you at least recognize that this is something that's there. Something that I've seen.
Actually,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly to your point. I think 3 years back, we called sick leave as sick leaves. And it was like any other organization, right? And when we started doing our own reflection work, we realized that one, the language itself is, deficit-based language. We are talking about sickness in our body. So we transition from sick leaves to wellness leaves. And it might look like just language change, but it impacts in a very different way. And when we talk about wellness, then we have very clearly laid out in our HR policy that this wellness leave can be taken for physical as well as mental well-being. So it just makes it very visible for people that this is okay, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if people are able to be transparent about it, it might change the way in which you interact with it also, right? Like you wouldn't, if someone is out because they have a stomachache, you might still message them or call them and say, I have a question, but you wouldn't do that if someone's out because they're experiencing a lot of anxiety. And the other thing that I would add is just having senior management take the lead and talk about their own, like mental health, mental well-being, what's going on. So that's a signal that, other people can do the same thing. And that's, which actually brings me to another question that had come in, which is, how does someone manage the trade-off between high productivity and mental well-being, considering one can come at the cost of the other? I think especially during everything now that's going on.
I will kind of connect it back to what I was saying earlier about productivity. It actually is a myth. Mental well-being doesn't come in the way of productivity. We need to renegotiate and re-understand productivity. Let's understand what productivity is. In the industrial definition of productivity, it means that what is the input and what is the output and what is their relationship, right? So if I'm saying that my input is just physical input or work hours, then it might look like that I am taking away those work hours to the more hours I put in, the more productivity or more outcome I'm going to offer, which is untrue, right? If I am say for example, if I have a stomach ache, right? I'm sitting with a stomach ache and I'm trying to write a code, software, right?
Yeah.
Is it going to be the best software I will write? We know that it will not be. And I will be told to take a wellness leave and go home and rest well and come back, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm going through anxiety, when I know that, okay, I don't know where the food will come from, with COVID going on, I will lose my job, and I'm thinking about that. And then you're also asking me to kind of go and serve the community or write a proposal.
Yeah.
My mind is not there, right? So it's the same equation, right? Because when we understand the same thing in physical health scenario, I think it is important that we shift and expand our thinking to recognize that mental well-being actually is a great input for a high productivity. So that balance has to be understood, and it's no one's fault, right? Because so as socially we have never engaged with emotional intelligence or emotional well-being as a concept, right? So it's a new concept, and hence we all have to engage with it together.
Yeah, and I think that's really, thank you for saying that, like this myth around productivity and these standards that we hold ourselves to as organizations, and then obviously as people as a result. So what are some things that I think that senior management can do? And there's a question that says, how do you convince senior management to invest in teams' well-being? Like what can a person who I guess doesn't have that amount of power in the organization or doesn't get to call the shots, what can they do?
Don't leave the organization. That's not the answer. I think one way would be that definitely approach if your organization has a human resource team, they would be a good place to start. If you are noticing as a team member that there's a high level of stress within your colleagues, maybe naming it to HR and asking and strategizing with the human resources team might be a good place to start. And through them, if some data can be collected, say for example, if HR runs a survey on well-being and how people are experiencing well-being, and with that data and with that evidence, maybe reaching out to senior leadership. And I'm sure other piece that works is that aligning it to the vision statement. So if there's a vision statement that calls out well-being as something that can be aligned, and I think HR teams might have done that work already, right? So taking that route sometimes helps because again, senior leadership is also not villains, right? I mean, they may not know, and it's in Apnishala we call it I don't know what I don't know. So how do we invite them into looking at it together? And I think I find HR teams as a very crucial segue or facilitative resource within organizations. Also backing up, I'm just going to summarize what I said, backing up with data of what does it look like within the organization. Sometimes also even data from outside, like what does research say? And that is something HR teams can pull out. There's enough and more available outside in the ecosystem. How well-being contributes towards higher level of productivity and better outcomes for organizations. There's enough research around that. And then aligning it to the vision. And if the vision doesn't calls for it, maybe changing the vision.
Yeah, I think over here it would be, or maybe we can come back to it. So you have shared in the past, steps, and I think senior management in general, especially in a nonprofit, they are more inclined to do things that won't cost more money or like more resources because they don't have access to that. And you have shared some things in the past that don't require a very high cost upfront. So could you like share some of those also?
Right. I mean, some of these things are pretty simple. I think if we can start looking at where are the structures. So, for example, when we also start consulting organizations, one thing that we do is map it to your existing resources, because everything is not bad, right? If we are in a social impact organization, which means that there's something good that exists about our organization, right? I want to start from that place, right? So there's some goodness already existing in the ecosystem. How do we tap on that? Say, for example, you may already have a time for managerial meetings or staff updates, right? If you have a 1 hour budgeted there, that is already a line item in your budgets, right? That time is budgeted for. So out of that 1 hour, can you allocate 10 minutes of just talking about well-being, right? and that's an easy start. You're not creating a new line item for well-being. Likewise, there are a lot of Coursera courses, for example. Can you recommend that to your team to take some of those courses in their own time? Or maybe can that be looped into the PD of organization or team members, right? So these resources are already available, are available for free, and they can be accessed online for people to kind of start engaging with. Then there are some other ways. For example, if you want to partner with therapists, there are many therapists who kind of are open to offer either one-time, several-time consultancy or reduced cost therapies. All of those options can be negotiated once we know that we intend to do well-being work, right?
Correct. Sorry, someone is asking me to pin the topic of the discussion over here. This is my first Instagram live, you guys, so my bad. Rohit, 1 second, I'm just going to do that.
Sure.
It's especially bad because Anushka, who's on our team, reminded me to do this at the beginning of the conversation. And then, of course, I got nervous, so I didn't. You were talking about therapists and working with therapists perhaps at a reduced cost or different modes of engagement that they offer. I know that can be an especially helpful way to go down. Someone actually has asked us, relevant to that, they asked when, if an organization is thinking about working with a therapist or keeping someone on retainer, what are some things for them to consider, or some things that they should keep in mind?
I would say the first thing would be structured confidentiality. That's a big one. It requires people need to feel safe, and people need to know that it will not go out, or it will not even come to the performance evaluation process. It has to be separated and made really very clearly visible, because that people get worried about that, and that's a very real worry. Then two, also see if it is possible to align therapists' own values to organizational values, because especially if you are a very values-driven organization. If you are someone who really place your values in the center of your work, I think that becomes really important. And then three, also create options of therapists, because same ways of seeking therapy may not work for all staff members. So if you can have like a bouquet of relationships with therapists, that helps when people can choose, okay, this one works for me more than this one, or even if this is not working, can I switch to someone else? So that might also be useful.
Yeah. That's actually really helpful, and those are three very easily implementable things. I think the part about confidentiality is incredibly important, because while you might think that your team knows it underlyingly, just always having it down on paper, having it out there is a non-negotiable. Could we also talk to, we've had a question about people saying, what are some good practices that managers checking in on their reportees on issues that don't fall into like the work domain? So what is that? What are some practices that they can follow?
So what we do at Apni Shala is we look at supervision in three areas, right? One is normative supervision, which means that you're talking about work. How is it going? Is it going well or not? Is it going in the same speed in which we agreed upon, etc., etc. Then there's formative work, which I think this is something all organizations do. Second one is where you talk about, okay, what are the developmental needs around for you to be able to achieve these goals, right?
Right.
And then the third piece is restorative work. I think restorative work is where with every work there's emotion involved, right? And unpacking that. So a safe starting would be that rather than talking about what's happening in your house or how you're doing with your family, maybe talk about, okay, what kind of emotions your work is bringing for you, right? Because that's a scope of work that you should talk about, right, as a manager. Creating space for that. And typically, if you have, say, for example, at Apni Shala, we have weekly supervision meetings where we start with a check-in, which is like a typically 10 minutes conversation around, and it could be 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, depending on what is the need, where supervisors and supervisors both talk about their what emotions are they bringing into the conversation. So start with emotions that are particularly related to work, because that is something is in the scope of your conversation anyways, and then slowly see where you are moving. One thing that works really well, or at least in my practice has worked, is that being able to talk about my own feelings as a supervisor or as a manager or as a leader, right? Because people would want to see that if I am able to put myself in a vulnerable space, that creates safety for team members.
Yeah.
Also practicing how do we move away from blame, shame, or guilt, recognizing that social, emotional, cognitive, and physical, these are 4 developmental areas that all human beings are always developing. So there's no blame, shame, or guilt around it. And periodically keep checking what feels right to them, what feels comfortable to engage or not, and keep kind of renegotiating boundaries as we are going. So we have something in Apnishala, and we are very grateful to Ummeed team, because this is an expertise we bring from Ummeed's mental health team, who has supported us in this work. We call negotiating supervision. That we quarterly, half yearly, and annually, we keep re-looking at, okay, is this working for you? Is this not working for you? Are there other ways to work with each other? And I think that renegotiation, because lives are changing, things are shifting.
Right.
Sometimes they are visible, sometimes they are not. Renegotiating that sometimes creates that opening. But even at Apnishala, for example, if something is going drastically difficult for you, I am not your therapist. I am your supervisor. You can share as much as possible, but then we also create boundaries and we honor boundaries. And I think that is a practice. And then after this space, your conversation needs to go and you need to kind of seek therapy. And that is something you have to identify it for yourself.
Correct.
And that's how we kind of manage that. Am I responding to your question?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think pretty well, the part about drawing some boundaries and figuring out this is how much we are able to do, and this is the skill set also I'm coming with. Like, I'm as your supervisor, I might not be a mental health professional, and this is how much I can negotiate with you. And then sort of, so even if you can't subsidize therapy or you can't do any of that, at least saying, you know, if you need time or you need to leave work early, you need to readjust times, like, please go do that. Those things I think are possible no matter what organization or how the organization is set up. We've had some questions come in that are relevant to the therapy point, so I'm just going to bring that up. One is narrower bandwidths and decentralized working spaces might prevent the onboarding of therapists. How can small teams or small nonprofits work in such a setup?
Sorry, can you rephrase the question again for me? I missed the first part.
Narrower bandwidths and decentralized working spaces might prevent the onboarding of therapists. So what can small teams and small nonprofits do when they have such a setup?
Right. So one thing that works, like, for example, at Apnishala, we still are figuring out that whole relationship piece, right? What has worked for us is that how do we build the concept of community mental health? I can go on and on about community mental health because that's my pet peeve. I really love that whole piece. So that's a whole separate discussion. But I think I'm going to just take a minute to expand on that. Community mental health, I think someone spoke about that in the chat as well, that how can we become caregivers to each other and how do we structure that for ourselves, right? Which does not mean that we become therapists of each other. So there's something called mental health first aid, where you are the first responder of something that is happening. I think that can be structured however small you are, however fun striped you are, because that is something that it's like, you know, however economically marginalized a family is, there's always a sense of care for each other, right? No one can take that away. So the same with the same logic, you know, it's that can be structured, and I think there are ways to structure that. Teams who are looking for that, definitely just Google up what is community mental health. A host of stuff will come up. Happy to engage if someone wants to kind of know more about that. They can reach out to me. I'm happy to kind of talk more about that.
Awesome. Which brings us to, I think, how can teams manage as a group? I think this is the question you were talking about, right? Job-specific mental health issues. So being overburdened by ground realities, overflooded with bad news, etc. How can teams manage that?
I think organizations which are working on the ground, where you are expecting a lot of bad news, a lot of distress in work, has a responsibility to create structured well-being for the organizations or the team. It's like, you know, we know that we have not been taught math but if I am supposed to teach math, so either you will train me for that skill, right? It's like that. And if you don't train me, then you don't recruit me. But the fact that social emotional development has not happened for generations for our country. So knowing that there will be distress emerging in the work, and I don't want to place the blame on the communities. It's not the communities who are giving us distress. It is the structural violence that gives us distress, and that has to be named. So know that poverty is a structural issue, and that is giving us distress, right?
Yeah.
So it is not the poor people who are giving us distress. It is the lack of planning and lack of governance reforms which are creating distress in the ecosystem, and that has to be named, and hence team well-being has to be structured as an HR policy in the organizations. So that is one piece. For colleagues and how at a one-on-one level, how can we do that? I think recognize that that's a thing, and when you do that, asking a simple question that what's coming up for you, like in the meeting, start with a 10 minutes check-in that what is coming up, right? And when we start doing that, well, how are you feeling emotionally about it? Just naming it sometimes also kind of creates a diffuser. But I think a structured training for organizations who are doing distress related work is I think is a non-negotiable. It's like, how do you kind of not provide that training when that your work requires that?
Yeah. And this, again, just to clarify, this is training that you're suggesting externally, right?
Sorry?
Like bring in someone with expertise externally to help train the organization.
Yeah.
And to add to that, just things that you were saying earlier on in the conversation, creating space for those conversations within team meetings, allowing space for people to share their feelings, creating the kind of organization where people feel comfortable talking about their mental health. I think all of that, again, would play a part in teams looking out for each other and in doing that care work. Sorry, we have Divyansh who's asking if we have time for questions at the end of the session. Divyansh, we have kept aside a few minutes for that. So you can type in your questions here or type them in later. Both would work. But we are not taking IDR specific questions in terms of about IDR as an organization. You can DM us, I guess, for that, and then we would respond. We will respond accordingly. Cool. I'm gonna. Should we move on to the next question that are coming?
Sure.
Cool. 1 second. So we have before. This is a more general question, and it says, "What resources can people draw upon to help manage well-being?" I think they're just looking for you to point them towards resources. And as an add-on, just so for the people who are listening, once you do that, we can share some best practices about managing during COVID and managing in general also. So
one definite resource is IDR Online. I think you guys have been publishing a couple of resources there. Especially think the entire well-being series has been really resourceful. When I was preparing for my article, I read through all of that. Two, there are a couple of resources on Apni Shala's blog as well. If you go on our website, you will find some resources there. And those are very specific resources. How to manage mental health in COVID, how to kind of manage mental health for our teams when they're working from home. So we have created some very specific resources based on our own ongoing practice for last couple of years. How to do it for children, how to do it for adults. So we have kind of tried to arrange it in ways that is meaningful and useful for people. Some of the places, some other places that folks can go is, I think just this, if you just Google up mental health spectrum, you will find tons of useful resources. And I think just knowing about the spectrum itself gives you a sense that where you are and how can you place yourself. KSL is another site where you can find a lot of useful resources. While I understand that mental health and social emotional learning are two different things, sometimes knowing one helps you the other. And I don't want to get into the nuances of the differences, but just know that they are different things but also overlapping. Then there are many resources you will find, like if you go to my article on IDR, I have kind of given a no more section where you can actually go to explicit resources that will guide you to do certain things. And the last one is, I think, your team's lived experiences. What better expertise than their own lives and what they have been doing to manage their well-being. And I think if you do just one session with your team, we call it, for example, in Apni Shala, we call it emotional jugaads, We did. It's based on narrative ideas. A resource called Sparkling Moments. What are those ways that we are managing on day-to-day basis our well-being, and we kind of tie them all together and create such a great resource. Devanshi, where we can actually kind of look at, okay, our team is managing our resources in this way. Can we look at them as a collective resource where everyone can, like, simple things with, जब मुझे गुस्सा आता है तो मैं 10 बार चल के आता हूँ या फिर मैं पानी पीता हूँ, right?
Yeah.
When you hear it, you realize, hey, that's a cool thing to do. And that's something that has become a practice, right? Because it's doable. Because if Devanshi can do it, I can do it. It's more relatable, right?
And thank you for saying that. I'm such a big believer in lived experiences being one of the greatest, like sharing that and learning from each other. Especially because, we run the danger of when we look up mental health and we look up resources, a lot of what comes up is from people perhaps in a Western context or just outside a context that might be similar to ours or that we can relate to. The water example is amazing. A glass of cold water when you're anxious, like, I know, just like, it's an immediate like body thing, right? So yeah, I wanted to point that out because I love that. I think we covered some of the questions that had come in earlier. There's a couple of more that I think we might be able to cover when we talk about just best practices. So if we could just touch upon, like best practices to follow when looking up for team well-being, touch upon what do you do about digital burnout or excessive screen time? For example, sorry, I've written these down. What do you do about, right, what are some creative and healthy ways to keep people motivated and to keep them healthy, in a team structure? And what can organizations do about their unpaid interns, or if they're a startup, about just unpaid directors and members on their team? Would you prefer to take these one at a time, or would you prefer to kind of club them together when we talk about just best practices for organizations?
I think I'm gonna put them all together when I'm talking. I think, for example, digital burnout, right? That's something that is new for all of us, especially in social impact sector, because we were not very tech savvy, right? India's development space was not very tech savvy in general. Of course, there are exceptions all the time. For example, even for Apni Shala, we were very hands-on people. We would go into the classrooms, we would work with communities to do social emotional conversations. Now, all of a sudden, everything is happening online. So we are also looking at what is the best time and how much screen time on a daily basis our team is engaging in, right? Collectively, what does the time look like, and also ensuring that it's not very continuous. That is one. And if it is, so for example, for large teams, everyone has to come on Zoom, or if you're facilitating a workshop, you have to come on Zoom or Google Meet or whatever you're using, right? And you need to be on screen time. But are there other things that you really don't need to look at the screen time? For example, can we, for a team meeting that you are not actively have to do something on screen, can you log in from your phone and keep it off screen and just listen to the conversation and participate and speak, right? These jugards came from the team. They shared what are they doing. Likewise, from a timing point of view, made it very flexible. Earlier we had okay, this is the time for you to come, this is the time for you to go, but we realized that it's not working out, right? There are team members who are really good working, and right now the happiness quotient has gone very high from that point of view particularly, because now teams can get up at 8 in the morning, for those it works, and work. There are teams who need to kind of actually do household chores in the morning and they cannot work. But then 9 p.m. in the night works really well for them because they have taken an afternoon nap and it works fine for them to stretch it up late in the night. So making that flexibility, what we have said is that the meeting times have to be between the office hours, which is 9:30 to 5:30, and also not exactly at 9:30. We start typically at around 10ish, unless of course something which cannot change, something which is like external partner dependent, etc. But internal meetings, we are trying to keep that way. Earlier we had, for example, 3 hours meetings. 3-hour meeting cannot work. We are shortening it to either, if we have to do 3 hours, then giving adequate amount of break and stretches. But also, for example, shortening our meetings itself. We are doing 2-hour meetings so that people are not on screen all the time. Also finding what are the ways in which non-screen work can happen. And those are, again, teams will inform you better than anyone else. They will tell you how they are doing it already. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm responding to that one. And I think creative ways of keeping teams healthy and motivated, ask them. uh, sorry, I may sound like a broken record that every time it's like I am such a believer of people's agency, and I'm learning to inculcate that, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's no science behind that which says that this would apply for everyone. Sure, there's some science around what applies to many people, but it will change for your team, and whatever science is saying, you can use that and then ask, is this working out for you? For example, in the beginning when we said that we will do 9:30 to 5:30, and we realized it will not work for teams. And our team comes from a very diverse socioeconomic and gender backgrounds, right? For example, as a male CEO, I know that, oh, I can get up and just be okay with not cleaning my house, but it may not be true for many of my colleagues, right? Mm-hmm. And how do I become cognizant of that? How do I become honoring of that? No, it is not a good thing I'm doing. It is a must thing. I need to kind of look at equity from that lens. Yeah. So when I'm thinking about keeping teams motivated, I think when we start honoring their lives as it is, and start honoring their voices in decision making, they feel motivated by itself. And I'm speaking purely from an Apni Shala point of view, because our team is very demanding for democratic space. And and I think I love that, because then there's an ask on the leadership team to create the space democratic and ensure that happens on a day-to-day basis. So that helps our team. Check out with your team what works for them. For some, it may or may not.
Yeah, and I want to add to that and also address this point that's come in that says there's no break in screen time for folks working in social media marketing and nonprofits.
Yes.
We, IDR, I mean, for everyone who's here, I assume you follow IDR, we're an online platform, we publish all the time. So when our work grew exponentially, the time spent on the screen grew exponentially also. And one of the ways in which we tried to combat this is really just create some boundaries, right, around work. Yeah. So it doesn't feel like you're living in the office now, because the office has moved to home. And there's some really simple ways, I think, to do that. And all of them rest on prioritization, of course. So there's a feeling, especially in the beginning of lockdown, where everything felt urgent, right? Like there's 100 things going on, everything is urgent, everything has to happen today, in the same hour. And then making people take a step back and say, okay, no, if this happens tomorrow or if this happened next week, nothing would happen. Like no one is going to notice except for you. So please take a moment. So prioritizing work, prioritizing things that could be pushed aside, and then just creating some boundaries in how we communicate with each other. So we started IDR saying no work-related texts on the WhatsApp group between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. Just because I did, you don't want the WhatsApp group to become a source of anxiety. You're getting a message in the night, somebody has to respond to it. So send an email, we use Slack, so respond over Slack. If it's urgent, call that person directly, instead of making the whole team kind of think about it. Rohit, like you said, encouraging time off screen. Allowing flexible work hours so people we have the same thing. So, we have team members who like to start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. I prefer to work in the night, and start a little bit late. So allowing that so that people don't feel the need that even if they started working at 6 a.m., they still have to be working till 6 p.m. They get to, like you said, take a nap in the afternoon or just log off early, or they have kids, they have things going on at home, they can switch off. What else? I think, obviously everything is banked on what you said, right? Like prioritize, listen to what people want. So a lot of everything that we do came from suggestions from the team. Something that we've found in terms of creative and fun ways is we do games. Like we play games every once in a while.
Same.
Again, like games or happy hour or just, like some non-work, like be intentional about like hanging out and not talking about work.
Yes.
And just like
we did our 8th anniversary. Sorry.
No. Yes, tell us. How did you do your 8th anniversary?
No, we did our 8th anniversary on Zoom. That was something that we would have never imagined, right? We said that this is a lunch hour hangout. Bring your lunch or don't, whatever feels right to you. We'll hang out. Keep the screen on or off, whatever works for you. Keep your mic on. That was the minimum requirement. And we just chatted and joked. I totally resonate with you. Like our HR team does this once in a month.
Yeah, we did the same for our third anniversary, which would have been never heard of either. You know, we were planning something in the office, and obviously that didn't happen. So, similar. So we said, bring a beverage of your choice. You know, we're on Zoom, we're having
Yeah.
conversations. We remembered some stuff we were doing in the office. Yeah, played some games. It was good. So I think they just provide some structure for the conversation we've had so far. Jump in if I've missed anything, but I think we seem to have talked about things in a few big categories.
There is, sorry, I just want to add one more thing, Devanshu.
Yeah.
One is check in for people and their families, because now their families have opened their homes for you to be able to get your work done from those homes. People are not working from home, people are working at home while they are at home taking care of home. So I think honoring that, checking in how your family is doing, how's your dad, how's your mom, or how's their health. I think that kind of adds to the reality that now they are part of the team, right? Earlier also they were, but now they are more. I mean, they're just there, right? They are creating space for you to be able to work at home, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And they're adjusting their lives to it, like around it, right? Thank you for saying that. I love. Can I just say that I love how everything you say is like centered around the humanity of another person and the people that you're working with. So it's awesome. Like from listening to them, checking in on them as a human, like a person, right? Not just an employee at your organization, but as a full person. I think we're nearing towards the end. Just to summarize, I think some of what we talked about and the broad categories of it. Please add on. I made like little notes while we were talking, but it seems to be around like big strategies of. Obviously, the first one is ask people what they want. People know what they need. Ask them for that. Respond to their humanity and figure out how you, as an organization, can what. So, if you as a senior staff member know what an organization can do, now figure out what your team needs and find the middle ground together. Like build that out democratically. The second one would be around everything that we were talking about in terms of flexible work times or just days off or boundaries around communication. So I think just creating boundaries around work so that people don't, feel like it's taking over all of their waking hours just because it can now. The other thing I have is being intentional. I think about this downtime, right? What we talked about, be it downtime together as a team or downtime individually. Can you structure people's leaves better? Can you encourage them to have conversations about what they need in terms of time off? And then I think we spoke a lot about just like being clear with people. So be it in terms of policy, be it in terms of meetings with managers. There's a risk of people not feeling grounded right now because they're not coming to the office. They don't have that much visibility into what the whole team is doing. So I think if we can create that grounding virtually or just create space for people to feel like, okay, this is still some larger part of the plan. I'm not just floating around on my own island doing stuff. Those were the 4 things I had. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think, thank you. You summarized beautifully.
I mean, I'm an editor, so it's like my one job. But this is awesome. I think this has been really fun. I'm going to pause for a second and see if anybody wants to type anything else in. But other than that, Rohit, I would love to thank you, for taking the time to chat with us. Thank anybody who is here now and who tuned in earlier to listen. And then just ask you, Rohit, if there was one takeaway message that you could leave people with, or just one thing that you want them to think about, what would that be?
I think I would say mental well-being and mental health is a real thing. We recently ran a campaign called Dikhta Nahi Hota Hai. And I think that's one thing that I want to kind of leave people with. So consider this, that mental health shayad dikhta nahi hai, it is not visible, but it is. And I think it is time that we start working towards that.
I think that's perfect for this, for this conversation. Thank you. To people who are listening in, I know there were some really specific to IDR questions. Please DM us. We are going to be trying to do more of these live soon. This was our first one ever, my first one ever also. So stay tuned for more. Rohit, thank you so much. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Devanshu. Thank you so much.
All right. See you.
See you. Bye-bye.
See you. Bye.